Well, good morning, Brett.
Morning.
I'm so glad that we can meet this morning to talk about Maria's Choice, the organization that you've newly formed to benefit expectant mothers in the community.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. So please tell us about your new organization. Just exactly what does it do?
Maria's Choice is a nonprofit organization that responds to the need of pregnant women who are thinking about getting an abortion not because they don't want their children, but because they feel like they can't afford their children. So let me talk about that a little bit, because I think some people will be surprised to say, what does that mean? When you look at abortion statistics, particularly those from the Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-choice think tank, they do a lot of surveys about the whys of women getting abortion. Why do they do this? And I can summarize it as something like this. About 50%, and we're talking about the United States here, about 50% get abortions because they don't want to have their children. Now, there are various reasons about why, but you could summarize it into something like that. A very kind of self-centered, I don't want the child. However, the other 50% you could summarize as saying that they feel like they can't afford to have their children.
Okay.
And most of the time that's some kind of financial difficulties, financial distress. So when you look at the numbers in the United States, there are about 3,000 abortions, unfortunately, every day in the United States. So you're talking about 1,500 happening every day, simply because these women feel like they can't afford to have their children. When you look at, so who helps these women, it's crisis pregnancy centers. And there are about 2,500, more or less, out there in the United States. And they have proven through the work that they do that just by extending a helping hand to these women, usually just in terms of some kind of short-term material assistance to cover their living expenses, many times that is enough to get them to change their minds from having an abortion to deciding to have their children. So what Maria's Choice is doing is we are partnering with crisis pregnancy centers. And what we do is we bring the real life stories of these women who are in crisis onto our website. And it gives pro-life supporters the opportunity to go to the site and experience for themselves the real need that these women have. And then what we do, let's say you visited the site, you're a pro-life supporter, you read through the stories, and if there's a particular story of a woman that touches your heart, we then give you the opportunity to make a tax-free donation to that woman to help her out. And we start from $1. You can make a donation anywhere from $1. Of course, you can go as high as you want. But just from $1, we allow a pro-life supporter to get involved and help that woman. And at the end of the day, for pro-life supporters, they do that, and you can feel good knowing that you had an impact in helping a woman choose life for her child.
So you really started Maria's Choice to enable the pro-life supporter to make a contribution at any level.
Yes.
And that's very important.
Well, because it's difficult, and I understand crisis pregnancy centers, of course, they have to go raise money in order to operate and to provide services to these women. But they spend most of their time, it's a volunteer staff for the most part, and they spend most of their time serving the women, which is exactly what they should be doing. So going out and reaching out into the pro-life community and raising funds, they don't have a lot of time or resources to do that. So I consider Maria's Choice kind of a platform. It's a tool that these crisis pregnancy centers can use to reach out into the pro-life community and bring in funds to help women who come into their centers and need assistance.
That's excellent. Why you could have called this organization by any name, really many names. Why did you choose the name Maria's Choice?
You know what? I would love to take credit for that, but I can't. Actually, it's strange how God works. My wife actually came up with that name. And it gets back to a story, if I could talk a little bit about, the journey getting here. The journey for me really started when I came into the Catholic Church, which was about 11 years ago. And through that process, of course, as you're coming into the church, you have to learn all the church teachings. And so I had to learn for the first time the Catholic Church teaching on life issues. And of course, abortion being part of that. Now, that can be difficult for anybody. For me, it was particularly difficult because, many, many years before that, I actually was involved with abortion. Meaning when I was a very young man, my girlfriend got pregnant and decided to have an abortion. Now, I'm ashamed to say that so many years passed, and that had absolutely no impact on me whatsoever. To me, it was just like contraception, for example. But once I became Catholic, it was like, oh no, what did I do? And understand that when I came into the church, of course, I felt completely forgiven by God for my role in that decision. However, as the years went on and I became very active pro-life, I'd go to the marches and do all that kind of stuff. But there was always something in my heart that wasn't right, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And one day I was driving home, and I heard on the radio, our local radio here, Holy Spirit Radio, an advertisement for a Rachel's Vineyard retreat at Our Lady of Czestochowa. And without knowing exactly why, I just knew I had to be there. So I immediately pulled into my driveway, ran upstairs, called him up, and there I was like the next weekend I was there. Even when I was there, though, I had to tell the people during the introductory part I wasn't sure why I was there. I just needed to be there. And the first night I discovered the reason why. There's the Rachel Vineyard retreats are very private, but I can say there's a presentation that takes place. And part of that is the story of a woman who had multiple abortions, ended up getting married, had her own children, family, and was going through something similar to what I went through. There was still a hole in her heart. And one night she went downstairs and started writing personal letters to each of her aborted children, giving them names. And it hit me right there. And the issue for me was I had never acknowledged the humanity of my child by thinking about him and then also actually acknowledging that he's a person. And so through that process of that week in the retreat, for the first time, I established a relationship talking with I think it's my son. I call him Jesse. There's a whole story about why I think that is, but that's another time. So I knew that when I came out of that experience, I just felt called to do something. And the do something for me started with apologetics, pro-life apologetics, because I liked, it's one of the reasons I came into the Catholic Church, the philosophy about, the same thing it was for pro-life. I loved looking at the arguments and talking about the arguments pro-life versus pro-choice. So I actually started down that path with Pro-Life Magazine, which we distribute through the iPad, and then we do the Pro-Life Response website, which you've been gracious enough to contribute to. We have articles there about many things. But all along the way, my wife kept asking me, Brett, that's great, that's great, that's great. And she would say, but what about the women? What about the women? What are you doing for them? And I was always kind of like, and my answer was, well, nothing. And so having a lot of discussions with some people I'm very close to that support Pro-Life Response Organization, I started talking about what can we do? What's the action part here? Specifically, how can we help women? And with my background in internet marketing, I was very familiar with crowdfunding, which is not so new anymore and it's still becoming very popular, but I was like, how can I apply the crowdfunding concept to crisis pregnancy centers to help them raise money?
Would you say that that's really what makes Maria's Choice unique?
It is, yeah.
That segue from the crisis pregnancy center
Yes.
to the public to somehow connect?
It is, because crisis pregnancy centers now, of course, they go out and raise funds, but I feel like they only reach, it's not their fault, it's just a question of resources. I feel like they only reach a segment, a very small segment, actually, of the pro-life community, because you could estimate that there are approximately 100 million adult pro-life advocates in the United States, and I don't believe all of them are supporting crisis pregnancy centers.
No.
I wish they were. So the idea is how do you bring these two together in an easy to access place? The other issue is usually when crisis pregnancy centers do raise money, they have to have just a couple of events, and they really need people that can write large checks, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 and up. And out of that 100 million people in the United States, pro-life supporters, many of them can't do that. But I guarantee you many of them can donate $1, $5, $10. And so that was the whole idea. The other part was, it's nice to donate to an organization that you know is doing good, but a lot of times you don't get to actually see the tangible result of your donation. Whereas with Maria's Choice, you are seeing the actual story of a woman in need now on the website. Of course, we keep the name anonymous. There's no actual pictures of the person, but the story of the need is real. And I think that is another unique aspect of Maria's Choice, and so far that seems to appeal to pro-life supporters very strongly.
Yeah. There's a real sense of connection between the donor and the recipient.
Yeah.
The immediacy of it. Yeah. It's short of being right there, with the person. I cannot imagine any more immediate way to help. It's a great idea.
Thank you.
Great idea.
And you were talking earlier about the name. I'm sorry, I took kind of a long route there.
Okay.
So my wife came up with that, and as I started thinking about this crowdfunding concept, we had that name out there a while. I think I even reserved the domain name like a long time ago. I was like, well, in case, but I didn't know what to do with it. And it was almost like it was waiting for this concept to come along and fit in there. But then, I thought it was so perfect because I also think about the story of Mary and Jesus, and I think a lot of times we tend to romanticize that story and forget, here was Mary, very young woman who probably had her own plans for her life, and suddenly angel shows up and says, well, this is God's plan. And to make that difficult decision and trust, and really with no promise whatsoever that this would lead to any kind of an easy life. And as a matter of fact, when you look at Mary's life after that, it was a very difficult life.
Filled with challenge.
Anywhere from, nowhere to actually have Jesus, no place at the inn, so let's have Jesus in the barn surrounded by stinking animals, all the way to now we have to leave because people are coming to kill him. And then later in life, as Jesus starts to preach, and there's so many people, of course, publicly critical of him, and Mary heard this constantly, right? And then all the way to the culmination of watching her own beloved son be brutally tortured and crucified. Not an easy life whatsoever. So I don't want to trivialize or say that these women that come to these crisis pregnancy centers have an easy life or an easy decision. They don't. But what I want to say is by us showing love and compassion and support for them, it can take them from being in an extremely difficult situation to at least see some light of hope that they have. And I think that's what Maria's Choice ultimately is about, is giving these women hope.
It's great. It's great. When I saw the name, I did think actually of the great fiat of Mary, and I hope that inspires, women in a crisis situation to do the same.
Yeah.
To do the same.
And a lot of times, Mary, as you know, many of these women that come into crisis pregnancy centers are not religious in any way whatsoever. But evangelization takes many forms. Of course, many times there's the words, but I think probably even more powerful is action. So I often think, when I'm thinking about Maria's Choice, I think about the Good Samaritan story a lot, and kind of preceding that story when the scholar was asking Jesus about the Great Commandments. And he answers, love God with everything that you have, love your neighbor as yourself. And then the scholar kind of asks back, and who is my neighbor? So I often think of these women, each individual one. I think about, the person, the gentleman that's traveling from Jericho to Jerusalem, gets beaten up by the robbers, is laying on the side of the road. The priests pass by and do nothing, and here comes the Good Samaritan, moved with compassion at the sight. I always think of that line, moved with compassion at the sight. So it's not that he didn't know there was bad things happening in the world, but now he walked upon the need and confronted it. And instead of saying, well, I have other things to do, he acted immediately and helped. And I think about a lot of what Maria's Choice does is bring people, if you will, onto that road and actually see and confront the women in their real need, and hopefully be moved with compassion at the sight of reading these women's stories and want to do something about it. On the site, of course, there's the opportunity to donate. But I would say, you know what? If you can't do that, even just pray for them, right? Or even consider volunteering at one of these crisis pregnancy centers. They need volunteers. They need help. Anything. But please don't just walk by.
Well, when you were talking about the Good Samaritan, I was wondering if you've had any successes yourself through this outreach in the organization.
I'm happy to say that we have, and we just started this project recently, and on purpose, I kept it very small. From my years of experience in internet marketing, anytime you roll out something like this, you better start small, learn to crawl before you walk, before you run. So we started the project with one crisis pregnancy center called the Hope Center, which is in downtown Philadelphia. It's in a very difficult part of Philadelphia where, unfortunately, abortion is very, very common.
Yeah. Many economic challenges.
Yes, a lot of challenges of all types. So we put up one project, and an anonymous name, or her name is Anne, and we're able to fund that project within just a few days.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Now we have two other projects up there. By the time people hear this interview, who knows where this will go. But one of them that really touches my heart is one that's up there now, a young lady who became pregnant, but her boyfriend is abusive, physically abusive. So her fear was, she originally was seeking an abortion because she thought, well, this isn't going to work. He's going to continue to abuse me, probably abuse our child. And she was very abortion-minded. Came into the Hope Center, and they were able to get her to see that there was a way, because they detected that she actually wanted to have the child, but just felt because of these other circumstances that it wasn't possible. And so they were able to get her to the point and show her, if you do these things, it's possible. They were able to get to the point where she accepted that. But it involved, of course, leaving her boyfriend, who was her total support lifeline in terms of everything that she needed. So suddenly here she is. She's made the decision to have her child, but now she's completely in need of the most basic things. Right, certainly things for her new baby that's now coming. So she is a project, we call her Diane, that we have up on our site. And I just think, Mary, how many times similar stories play out across the United States every single day. There's always a common thread that runs through these stories, and it usually starts, unfortunately, with the woman being abandoned in some way by, number one, the child's father, and then possibly a fallback that can help, or family and friends, but sometimes, unfortunately, the family and friends don't support the woman either. So she's really kind of left alone, almost like abandoned on an island by herself. And in that circumstance, to choose to go ahead and have your child can be very, very, very difficult decision. So these women, first of all, the women that do decide to go ahead and have their children are absolute heroes. And thank God for the women, and it's mostly women, in crisis pregnancy centers that reach out with love and compassion to help these women, to show them that there is a way. And now Maria's Choice, which can become part of that support network.
And you're also providing such a supportive environment, obviously, but also a healthier environment. I'm thinking of Diana herself, not just of her child, but to remove her from a clearly abusive relationship and surround her with people who love her and can, support her and the coming baby. I just think the repercussions for her go far beyond the immediate moment. They really do, and it's.
And I always
That's
think,
God's work.
Another thing, exactly. And I think back to, we're all going to stand before the Lord someday, and we have that book that we present about the things that we did. And when I think about what goes on at crisis pregnancy centers, which I should also say are sometimes called pregnancy resource centers, there's different terminology for it. When I think about the work that's done there and what happens, I always think back to the famous the sheep on the one side, the goats on the other, and to have so many opportunities. Maria's Choice is one way, but there are other ways to help these women, and I know the Lord looks upon that with just
absolutely.
That's what good people do. And very generous and help people in need. And these women truly are our neighbors. So what is your long-term vision for Maria's Choice? I mean, clearly it's having effect right now in the lives of women and their children, but what is your long-term goal for the organization? Well, Mary, I think big. I never think small. So as I said earlier in our interview, there are approximately, of course it's changing all the time, but there are approximately 2,500 of these crisis pregnancy centers spread across the United States. I would like Maria's Choice to be used by every single one of them. Why? Well, because as I've already seen in the very short time that we've been doing this project, it is allowing a much deeper connection between a woman or the women in need and pro-lifers who want so badly, first of all, to get rid of abortion. But as part of a way to get rid of abortion, reduce demand for abortion, is help these women. And I've seen already, just in the eyes of the people that I've talked to, when I talk about what was your experience when you went on the site and went through the donation process, to see how their eyes light up, knowing that they made an impact to a particular human being, that even though it's an anonymous name, it's a name. It's still real. It's right? Still It's real. A story. And like I said, I want to emphasize that just giving to the general organization of crisis pregnancy centers is a great thing to do, and I hope pro-life people are doing that and will continue to do that and do it more. But I noticed there's something unique about this that establishes that relationship. And my hope is there's always the privacy issue. But my hope is, as we go forward, take our first project, Anne, that we can keep up to date on what's going on in her life. So if she's willing to at least give some information, so the baby was born, for example, possibly even the baby's name. And I know it depends on the person, people willing to reveal certain information and not, I'm okay with that. But if there are women that are willing to let the people that supported her through Maria's Choice into her life a little bit more, I think that connection becomes even stronger. So that when other women are coming on with need, I see that these people that originally supported one are now more likely to want to support others. And in my mind, by having a website format, which it's the internet, right? So anybody that has access to a website should be able to go on there. I think it opens up this possibility of directly supporting these women through the crisis pregnancy centers to many, many more pro-life people. And that gets me really excited.
And also it extends the range not only nationally but also chronologically. I mean, it's not a one-time finished engagement.
Right.
I really think it's an exciting idea to have a name, to have a sense of a real human being, and to continue to be part of that life. And think of the implications for the expectant mother then. Her hope isn't just now, here, it goes beyond.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because when I visited the Hope Center recently to take down, we raised our first funds for Anne, so I took those funds down there, and we give 100% of the donation to the Crisis Pregnancy Center. They talked a little bit about how people come into the Crisis Pregnancy Center. And because many of these crisis pregnancy centers really don't have at all the advertising budget to match what Planned Parenthood does in the local neighborhoods, it's very difficult for them to get the word out. So, not surprising, many of the women that come in to the center have heard about the center from other women. So it's the famous word of mouth. Nowadays we call it viral marketing. But that word of mouth aspect is so important. And so now you start to see, as these women change their mind about abortion, have their children feel the joy from that, whether they decide to parent or give their child up for adoption. And then in the community, in the environment they're in, there are going to be other women, unfortunately, who come into that same kind of situation in the future. And if they're able to come in contact with someone who's been through this process at the pregnancy center, at least there's a chance that she'll be affected by that story, right? So it's a more difficult way to do it. It takes longer than just using the big Planned Parenthood advertising budget. But through this kind of on the ground, word of mouth marketing about the service, I feel like over time there's hope. We have a chance. We look at the numbers about abortion, and as a pro-life advocate, it breaks your heart. It's just so many. But if we can just, one person at a time, reduce that demand for abortion. And I can see sometime in the future, it's like the little snowball rolls down the hill. Right now it's really small, but someday, hopefully, as quickly as possible, that little snowball becomes something big, and then we're really on the way to reversing legal abortion in this country. And I also want to point out that the other work that's going on in pro-life community by many organizations, the ones that are trying to get the laws changed, the ones that are bringing us news about what's really happening inside of Planned Parenthood, organizations that are out in the front line trying to do what I would call that last-ditch effort, the ones that pray in front of the pregnancy centers and actually try to intervene and help a woman change her mind when she's really on the doorstep of getting an abortion. All of these along with the crisis pregnancy centers, play such a crucial role. It's a huge war that we're in, and any kind of new weapon that we can bring to this battle against just an enormous evil machine.
It is a machine.
And anything that we can do helps. And I look at Maria's Choice as perhaps it's just a new weapon in the battle.
Well, how can pro-life supporters get involved with Maria's Choice? Do you have any suggestions?
Thank you. Yes. Well, first of all, the easiest thing to do is just to go to our website, which is mariaschoice.org. We keep the website very simple. We want to make the process extremely easy. Mm-hmm. There is a short video on there which kind of takes you through how the process works and what your donation is going for. So that's the best way to start. The other is if you go through that process, and I invite you to, and I hope you will, that you'll want to tell others about it, mm-hmm. right? You're surrounded by pro-life people, and just let them know, hey, and as a matter of fact, it only takes $1. Right. So if that's all you can afford right now, do that, mm-hmm. because every little bit helps. And for crisis pregnancy centers that might hear this interview and want to look at bringing Maria's Choice as a platform that they can use, the issue there is just get in touch with me. Again, I want to emphasize that our first project was done with one particular pregnancy center, but Maria's Choice is really a software platform that is scalable and expandable, so we can easily set up any other center that's interested in this.
Well, that's, the thought that the good you do today could be increased exponentially by making connection with, really nationally. It doesn't have to end right here in suburban Philadelphia.
I hope it doesn't.
Right across the nation. That is so.
I mean,
so
when you
exciting.
consider the I don't even want to put myself on par with those guys, but when you look back at the apostles, I mean, they had nothing but God on their side, mm-hmm. and with that, look what happened.
Absolutely.
And so, I consider this God's work. I just want to be a tool mm-hmm. in His hand, and I want to give everything I have to it, but I want to leave it up to Him how this rolls out. Will it be quickly? Will it be area by area? I don't know. But I just think from what I've seen so far with our results that it's something that has an impact. It makes a difference. And I'm really hopeful for the future.
Well, thank you so very much for sharing this information, because I know that our readers will be as excited as I am to know of this opportunity. It's so immediate and it's so concrete that it gives us a positive way to help.
Well, thank you, Mary. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, my pleasure.